Welcome to the channel. So today we will be interviewing Mr. Gareth Jones. So Mr. Jones, could you tell me a bit about yourself?
My name is Gareth Derek Jones. The Derek is my father's middle name. I'm 41 years old. I have lived in Hong Kong for the last 8 years or so. Prior to that, in China for a similar amount of time. Hobbies: I like to hike. I like to read. Spend time with friends. That kind of thing.
So what inspired you to become a teacher? Was there like this moment where you said to yourself, yes, I want to be a teacher for the rest of my life?
No. In all honesty, I tried a few different things. So my degree, my non-teaching related degree is in law, and for a little while I wasn't sure if that's what I wanted to do or not. So I worked as a paralegal in the UK for a firm called Eversheds, a big law firm there. Then I kind of ran away from the law, ran to China, thinking to try something very different. I wanted to see what it was like to live in a communist country. When I got here, I realized that China is the Wild West. It's perhaps potentially more capitalist than many other places, but still it was very interesting. And when in China, I was initially doing something called teaching English as a foreign language, commonly known as a TEFL. So I did that for a year, then went back to the UK thinking I might teach, but then ended up working in marketing for a little bit. Then didn't like that. Did my teaching qualifications, came to China, but then I ended up working for an NGO because my wife and I had set up a little NGO in China when all of that was going on, and I ended up being headhunted, asked to go and run this the World Society of Protection of Animals, and working for them in their office in Beijing for a couple of years. That was interesting. We could talk about that. Wasn't quite what I anticipated it would be. So then I thought, okay, that was the moment where I had something equivalent to what you've just asked, and thought, okay, of all the things that I've done so far, the one that's brought me by far the most pleasure is teaching. And then at that point, I thought, okay, I'm going to go into that. I'm going to give it my best shot. And that's been the course that I've been on since that point.
What is your favorite part of being a teacher?
I think it brings out. Well, you might disagree as my student. And you might know you wouldn't have any evidence to the contrary. But I think it brings out my best self, because when you're a teacher, you have to forget about yourself. You have to be absolutely invested in everybody in that room. You have to want to help everybody in that room to get the best out of themselves. You have to be prepared. I'm very lucky that I get to teach things that I'm very passionate about, English and TOK, so it means that the things that I read are, generally speaking, both for pleasure and for work. So I'm very, very lucky in that sense. So yeah, I think that's a combination of those things. Yeah.
As you mentioned previously, speaking of your journey in China, as a teacher who can communicate in Chinese, do you ever see yourself teaching Chinese in the near future?
Oh God, no. Nowhere near good enough. Nowhere near good enough. Mr. Brasher, he's your man. Mr. Brasher can write. I can write with a computer badly. Mr. Brasher can write with a pen. It's lovely to have some abilities with a language, but I'm nowhere near good enough for that.
Speaking of your passion for TOK and English, if a student comes up to you and says, English is boring, TOK is boring, what would you say to them, and how would you provide them a new alternate perspective?
For TOK, I would say, and I say this to the TOK team of which I'm a part of, then I think we're failing that student, because, and I would say to that student that I'm failing you. I would say to my TOK class at the start of year 12, if you feel at any point, and there will be points along that route, but if that you feel this way, but if that feeling continues, this feeling of not knowing what's going on and why you're there, and I don't mean in a sort of deep philosophical sense, just having no realization or understanding as to why you're in that room and what it is that the subject and the teacher is trying to communicate, then there's been some kind of breakdown in the message that's being relayed. So I would ask that student to spend a bit of time with me, to go back to first principles, which in TOK is really, really simple. All we're doing is just asking the same question again and again and again, like, how do I know what I know? That's it, right? And it could be, how do I know what I know about myself? How do I know that the values that I believe to hold are the right values, the values that that are going to be useful in every single circumstance, regardless of who I'm with? How does the mathematician know when nobody knows? How does the historian, etc., etc., etc.? Is that question always answered the same across time? But it's the same thing. How do I know what I know? How do you know what you know? How does the community know what they know? That is it. So TOK is a really simple thing. A 5-year-old can get it. They really can. I was literally just having a conversation with a year one today when I was queuing up for my cheese and tomato wrap. We were talking about dragons and trees and what happens if the trees can grow up to the sky. And it was absolutely fascinating because that child has that inbuilt sense of curiosity that is something that we're all born with, and we seem to kind of lose it. But if we can keep that sense of curiosity and ask it inwardly, reflexively, then we're doing TOK. In relation to English, I would always say to my year 7 students, well, how many of you like to read? Generally 2/3, 3/4 of the kids will put up their hands, which is wonderful. Unfortunately, by the time we get to year 12, that number is usually a lot less, especially at standard level. I would say that my job is to try to get students to want to read. I think that's the primary objective. Doesn't mean that we succeed, but that should be the goal. And once we've got some way along that route, then hopefully a lot of the other problems that student might be feeling at the time will they'll do away with themselves. They'll dissipate naturally.